Welcome everybody to this Data Center World and Cloud Expo Asia virtual executive fireside chat hosted by Broadcom Brocade and IBM. The topic of this session is a tidal wave of digital transformation, evaluating the data center and network infrastructure landscape in 2020 and beyond. My name is Glenn Duncan and I'm based in Singapore. I lead the data center research program for IDC and APJ, and I will be moderating the session today. On today's panel, we have four panelists. We have AJ Casamento from Broadcom Brocade, Jeff Barber from IBM, Simon Lurie from Telstra, and Simon Lockington from Equinix. So I'll just to begin with, I'm going to ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves in turn, starting with AJ.
Yeah, good afternoon, folks. My name is AJ Casamento, and I work for the Brocade Storage Networking Group of Broadcom. And I am one of the principal solutions architects globally for our division within the company. Been at the company for about 23 years now. And prior to the pandemic, spent most of my time on the road, actually, out with customers, but now doing it virtually.
We can see. Thank you. Jeff.
Hey folks, Jeff Barber. I'm the Vice President of Global Storage Hardware Sales. So that means all our high-end disks, all our SAN, all our mid-range, etc. Don't be too disappointed. While I'm a sales guy, I'm an engineer by training. I grew up in IBM Semiconductor, so I know a little bit about technology, and hopefully I'll be able to share some of that with you folks today.
Great, thank you. Simon Lurie.
Thanks, Glenn. Afternoon or morning, everyone, depending on where you are. So Simon Lurie, I work for Telstra based in Singapore, and I head up the Technology Solutions and Services team across the South Asia region. And this also encompasses our Telstra Purple Asia team, which is our consulting and professional services capability. These teams' functions is really to lead our technology solutioning and project delivery across adaptive networks, data center and cloud transformation, modern workplace, and our security portfolio. Obviously, data center and cloud is the key topic today, and this really focuses on both the in-data center infrastructure, co-location services, hybrid and public cloud solutions, from migrations to application modernization. Thanks, Glenn.
Great, thank you. And Simon Lockington.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Simon Lockington. I manage the Global Solution Architecture team for Equinix in Asia Pacific. I'm based in Hong Kong. My team is a technical pre-sales team, which is focused on guiding our customers on their digital transformation journey with Platform Equinix.
Great, thank you. So on the panel, we've got quite a broad, diverse group of people. So we're covering off infrastructure, the data center, as well as the network and cloud to a certain extent. So we're going to have quite a few different perspectives on the particular topic. For me, this session is about four broad themes. It's about, firstly, digital transformation and COVID-19. So even before COVID-19, many organizations in Asia were digitally transforming. And COVID-19 has really only accelerated that process because people have been forced to work and play from home for extended periods of time. We have a polling question that I might put up later that talks specifically to that particular point. So that's sort of, I guess, the first broad theme that we'll be covering. The second is around IT infrastructure and the data center. So IT infrastructure and the data center under pressure. It's not just because of digital transformation or COVID-19, but also because of next generation workloads involving machine learning, artificial intelligence, big data, and high performance computing coming through that are putting pressure on the data center and the infrastructure environment. The network itself is also under pressure, particularly now because of COVID-19 with the rapid growth in sort of video streaming services and people working and living at home and on the edge. So for me, that's the second of the four broad themes that this session will cover. The third is around the emergence of new technologies. So, the data center and infrastructure under pressure, and vendors have responded to that. So to address these infrastructure and data center challenges, vendors have come out with new form factors and technologies, including hyperconverged infrastructure, flash storage, and software-defined technologies, including software-defined LAN and software-defined LAN and WAN, creating software-defined networks to address that part of the data center story. So emergence of new technologies is the third theme that we'll be covering off. And then finally, we'll be talking about the trend around hybrid multi-cloud and the fact that the dominant data center architecture to come through these days is hybrid multi-cloud, and increasingly a multi-cloud environment that's being pushed out to the edge and even the deep edge. So the questions today will be addressing these themes and more. As we go along in our discussion, feel free to post questions in the Q&A box on the right-hand side of your screen, and we'll attempt to address them either as we go along in our discussion or at the end if we have time. Also, if we have time, we'll post some polling questions as well to sort of stimulate discussion, and as well as to see where the audience is across a number of these themes. Okay, so jumping straight into the questions, I'm just going to go through a number of questions with the panel to stimulate discussion, and we'll go through each of these questions in turn. So the first question is around the challenges that are being experienced by organizations because of digital transformation and next generation app workloads. So what technical challenges has digital transformation and next generation workloads posed for IT infrastructure, data centers, and the network? So AJ, I'll throw to you straight up.
Yeah, so thanks, Glenn. I think that one of the things that folks need to keep in the back of their heads is this progression of technological consumption is something that's certainly been going on for a long time, right? Effectively, for 40 plus years, we've been moving bottlenecks around in IT. CPU performance to memory scale to storage capacities to the speed of the networks to the resilience of the wide area networks. As the application base has changed, right, and as we start seeing applications that are deeper, broader, all with good intention, yes. I mean, they're all intended to drive more loyalty from the customer base, to provide more functionality to the customer base, but that throws additional strain back into the systems, right? And keeping sort of that pace for upgrade. One thing that certainly has been true is at every step for the technology and the infrastructure, functionally, and I don't think any of the panelists would disagree with this, every time we expose new capacity and new performance to the software people, they figure out how to consume it all. I have yet to see a single instance where any of the application guys said, right, good enough, I'm in, we're fine, it'll all be, no. And we don't really expect to see that change. And so I think one of the biggest strains that I see from the customers is that you need to architect an environment where you can pretty reasonably seamlessly add net new infrastructures in, right? Next performance stages in without disrupting what's running. Because if somebody can please tell me where we're going to get service windows these days, I'd be very happy to entertain that conversation. But pretty much what I'm hearing from customers is, yeah, this year's not really a good year for us, and next year's not looking like your year to do an upgrade either. So figure out how to make it not disruptive to us. So I think that's been probably the most significant piece out of this for us.
Okay, Jeff, did you?
I think AJ brings up some really good points. I mean, that ability to scale as need be and to add technology dynamically is huge. I spend the majority of my time on a plane. I should say I spent the majority of my time on a plane. That's obviously been curtailed over the last 6 months. Hopefully it'll open up again. But the thing that was always interesting to me in the prior 12 months, I'd say, is, look, workloads are really changing. Glenn, you mentioned people are moving toward AI and big data in ways they never would have imagined in the past. I think there's even AI that goes on a smaller scale, on a real-time scale on databases, right? That kind of analysis is something that people want to do with their data. The other thing that I think's been a real challenge is not just that movement to, when you think big data, you're typically thinking files. You're not thinking 4K, 8K, 32K block applications. Now, in that OLTP front, I think the thing that's become a real challenge for folks is, wow, I sit back and I look at how the world has turned, and, it started with mainframes, and we went to PCs, and we went to VMs, right? Whatever flavor you've got, Hyper-V, VMware, you pick it. And now we're kind of doing cloud. And the thing that I see people really trying to grapple with and figure out how to manage is the whole move to containers, right? Containers are an open construct, and I have yet to find any customer out there that's writing new applications in anything but microservices and containers. And that's really easy to get your arms around from an application standpoint, but I think the thing that most customers are struggling with and asking help with is, okay, where do I put those really big AI applications for my OLTP applications that are basically running on some central server and a mobile phone somewhere? How do I move to that containerized world, right? Everybody's figured out that, VMs are not really efficient. If you can do things bare metal with containers and microservices, you're going to basically whack half of the compute power that you need, which is frankly a good thing. You need to do it because your competitors are doing it and you're going to get priced out. But if I look at technologically, what I'm really being asked to help out with is, one, help me with big data and AI. How do I handle that from an infrastructure standpoint? One. Two, man, this container promise is so important. I know I've got to do it from the standpoint of getting my arms around my data center costs, but I'm just not confident in how I do it. What infrastructure is the right infrastructure? How do I create persistent volumes if I'm in a container ephemeral world? So, Glenn, when you ask the simple question, to me, it's the workloads are a little different than we might have done the prior, 30 years. I mean, 5 years ago, you didn't hear a lot about containers. Today, when you talk to application designers, it's all you hear. So we've got to morph the infrastructure to meet those new workloads and new ways of developing things. That's the biggest thing that I've encountered over the last, 12 to 18 months.
Jeff, I think you mentioned the journey of compute from the mainframe to containers and microservices. What do you think are some of the issues around that? Some of the challenges around the integration of all those different? There's obviously sort of microservices and containers at the end, and application developers programming for that environment. What are your thoughts around that?
I think one of the things is that there are two in particular that I think people are struggling with. How do I deliver the same type of process and automation that I've got in those traditional complexes in that new containerized sphere, right? That's one. Because, Kubernetes is newer and people are still getting comfortable with it. And that's the automation layer, but then they've got to come up with an orchestration layer as well. So yeah, the application guys are off and running, but how do I build that same level of enterprise capability in that new containerized world? I think a lot of people are struggling with that, Glenn. And I think it's, as infrastructure providers, we need to help as best we can. Once they get to containers, then they can move it to whichever platform they think makes the most sense for their business from a reliability, performance, cost perspective. So we have a big opportunity to help our customers because they do have a lot of questions as they move to those new workloads and new formats.
Interesting. Simon Lurie, I'm going to throw to you. What are your thoughts on this initial question around the technical challenges being exposed, I guess, by digital transformation and next generation workloads?
Yeah, look, and I don't think it comes as a surprise to anybody, but we're all producing within our businesses and as consumers consuming more data than we ever have before, and that's a continuing trend that's just not going to go away. And what that's doing is that we're seeing challenges in and around the management of that data, from the increased storage requirements, the compute power that we need to be able to process and analyze that data, as well as the network capacity and the speed to be able to cope with the demands that our businesses and the end users within those businesses are expecting, quality application performance. And then you wrap around that all of the security requirements that are now evolving, with everything moving to the cloud. It's a very different type of security posture that our customers are seeing. And all of these factors are contributing to an increased density in our technology stacks. And if you think about that from a data center perspective, that's translating into higher power demands and increased cooling requirements. If I look at it from a Telstra point of view, the impact on the network is significant. And when COVID hit, we saw usage start to accelerate. Back in February, and increased across our core subsea cables. In March, so not shortly after, and it's somewhat normalised around that. However, overall, we're seeing that the increased data demands is driving an increase for bandwidth and speed and access to those applications. As Jeff mentioned, as they move to the cloud, people want that accessibility and they expect it to be now. And even post-COVID, we're not going to see that that's going to change from a trend point of view.
Mm-hmm. Okay, did you want to continue? Did you have something else?
Yeah, look, I was just going to say, look, I think the other component in and around that is that, as businesses are starting or continuing their digital transformation, that's leading to, more and more thought and requirements around the diversity and the resiliency that needs to be considered. And, as Jeff mentioned around containerization and the capability to be able to move workloads between multi-cloud environments, that means that the solutions and services, that capability needs to be inherently built into those applications and into the technology stack. And it also goes to AJ's point around service windows. Customers and businesses are going, well, we can't afford any downtime anymore. We don't want to have outages. We don't want to wait for new applications. So having that built in, helps facilitate how those businesses are going to evolve their technology services over time.
Some interesting points there. Data center rack density and uptime and resiliency might be something nice segue into to you, Simon Lockington.
Yeah, so just following on from Jeff and Simon's point about the amount of data, Glenn, I found in an IDC report actually that they were saying that less than 3% of the data currently being collected is actually being used in any business intelligence purpose. And so as AI and analytics practices continue to mature and additional applications from IoT and 5G come online, the demands on networks are just going to continue to be immense. And that poses some challenges for the legacy network infrastructure. And so now we're seeing more and more network automation and software-defined capabilities to try and address that, those issues with increased efficiency and reliability and a bit more agility so that customers can spin up and spin down connectivity and capacity on an as-needed basis. For us, there's a big focus on making sure that customers have viable ecosystems in their data centers so that they can connect to their partners and services to help process the data as it enters the data center or goes out, and without the associated lift of shifting it back to a centralized processing facility. So making sure that ecosystem is valuable and has all the components that a customer needs is really important. And then finally, just adding on to the compute discussion, where does compute really need to be? Do we have to have it right at the edge where the data resides or originates, or can it go into a more traditional cloud deployment? And if so, which cloud? Or maybe does some of these new cloud customer solutions that are coming out from AWS, Microsoft, and Oracle, are they more appropriate? Or, a lot of us still have a lot of legacy systems that are never going to move from an on-prem environment, and they're not going away anytime soon. So how do we incorporate those into this new world of microservices and containerization?
Great, thank you. Before we move on to the next question, I just wanted to do a bit of a call out to the audience. We don't have any questions yet in the Q&A. Feel free as we go along with this discussion to go to the Q&A tab and post any questions that you like for the panelists. So we've talked about some of these challenges that are being faced by the data center, IT, and the network, and already started to push in to what some of the solutions for these problems that are coming through. I want to just deep dive into that a little bit more, and if we can get more and more specific around what IT vendors and service providers are doing to support compute and the network demands brought about by these new next generation workloads. So quite happy to have a discussion across the entire stack, whether that's the infrastructure, whether that's from a service provider, network perspective, or a pure sort of colo interconnectivity perspective. Happy to have anything across any of that complete multi-cloud data center stack. So AJ, I'm going to throw it back to you.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that we want to keep in mind here is, and both of the Simons brought this out, is that we're talking about an ecosystem, right? And so the concept of where the data is being generated, where the data is going to be utilized, where it's going to be retained, how it needs to be retained, is not I don't think a single thing, a single solution set, right? There's a broad space here. Because the end users, the vast majority of the data, I think everybody would agree, is actually being generated well outside the data center. The internet, if we drop back to the Internet of Things, but that edge becomes more and more critical. COVID has, I think, and the pandemic as a whole has simply exposed the fact that we weren't quite ready for this level of utilization, right, as an overall infrastructure globally, right? Whether it was for learning purposes, whether it's for healthcare purposes, whether it's modeling the next vaccine, whatever it might be, we drop back into being completely reliant on these environments. So from our standpoint, one of the things that we see is, and some of this is driven by our friends like IBM, where these next generations of technologies, as they come towards us, we really don't want to be the bottleneck, right? And because it never works out well for whoever it is that ends up being the bottleneck in the process, right? And so as you start seeing things like non-volatile memory express or storage class memories coming in, and the latencies dropping down, the response times spinning up, the expectation that then our friends from Equinix and Telstra are going to make that performance available at the edge, or as you phrased it earlier, the deep edge, right? Because the user consumption is shifting on us. So we start seeing things like storage capacities where we can now realize multiple petabytes with a P, right? Peter, Paul, multiple petabytes of high performance, low latency, lossless, flash storage, right, in a non-volatile memory express environment, within a 2U rack height. That's insane. And the concept that Moore's law now applies to the external storage as well as to the compute and memory resources. That's not a scenario we've ever lived with before. And so those technologies are going to continue to iterate. I take the point on containers. I would make the argument that consumers are not forgiving. Humans have a lot of really good characteristics. Patience is not among them. And so, whether the application's running in kernel memory space or user memory space, there's still expectations around the performance. There's still expectations around the utility of the application, right? And what we're expecting out of it. That's driving us to an additional piece here, which is, how can humans be fast enough? Right, and that's a scenario that is seriously going to be a challenge for us, because from our standpoint, we believe that infrastructure needs to be self-learning, self-optimizing, and self-healing. Because if the first time that you start to debug something is when a human sees something pop on a screen, you're already behind the curve. To Simon Levy's point of view or point earlier, you don't want to take that kind of a hit in the performance to the application ever, right? There's just no forgiveness for it.
One of the things that you mentioned really stuck with me was the idea of bottlenecks in this new ecosystem, and that nobody wants to be the bottleneck. Now, you don't have to answer this now, because this is a fairly sort of new concept of an ecosystem with bottlenecks in it. But do you have any inkling at the moment of where the bottlenecks might be, or if not yet, it's okay. I don't want to sort of throw you something.
So actually, one of the interesting things in this progression has to do with the server platform. So as they're shifting out of PCIe Gen 3 into PCIe Gen 4, and how rapidly that's going to play out, you're talking about fattening the pipe from the processor out, to the I/O subsystems and out to the application from the application users, right, at the other end. And so that's going to shift the bottleneck back to networks again for a little bit. And one of the things that we've certainly discovered, there are times when I look with a little bit of, I'll say envy, not jealousy, but with a little bit of envy towards some of the infrastructure I see deployed elsewhere in the world, because sometimes it seems like here stateside we've gotten a little bit behind the curve. So, when you see the kind of performance that the networks need to have to the edge, smart city, IoT, take your pick for how you want to describe that. That's going to be a challenge, I think. And as the compute nodes get better, that pushes the pressure back to the network. And so as you look at the storage capacities and the storage performances, and as they move to the next iteration of non-volatile memory express, and then because we're already sub 20 microseconds on at a device level, right? And a normal NVMe device today is 4 lanes of Gen 3 PCIe, which is 32 gig in performance, right? So that if you really want to have end-to-end performance with no bottlenecking, that means that the network has to pick up and bear that brunt. And I will also make one other observation, which is there's an awful lot of applications get developed extremely rapidly. I won't say with no QA, but it certainly seems like they get launched over the wall into the infrastructure pretty readily, and not always knowing what the strain is they're going to put into the system. And so to Jeff's point, when you want to run the analytics against the database, right, to get that value, Simon's point that 3% of the data is actually being used for business intelligence. As the AI systems get better, they're going to want to crunch more of that data.
Okay, great, thank you.
Yeah,
Jeff, I'm going to pass to you.
Yeah, AJ, I agree with a ton of things you said. You don't want to be the bottleneck. Whatever you implement's got to be automated. I mean, that AI that everybody talks about, we need as vendors to make sure it is built into whatever system we're selling, right? It is crucial, because the volume, the performance requirements, the uptime requirements, frankly, there are a lot of smart guys I'm looking at on the screen, but we're never going to be as smart or as quick as a computer will be. Hence, let's utilize AI to manage whatever we do sell. The thing that is interesting from a technological standpoint to me is, people are looking at AI, they're looking at the ability to create new applications, refactor the old ones. The one thing that I've really encountered over the last 2 years is we've got to make sure that we're getting the right technology to the right problem, right? You handle a database differently than you handle a truly big data facial recognition application, right? And one of the things that we're trying to make sure at IBM is we're trying to make sure that we steer customers to the right solution. When you're doing a great big, let's say facial recognition, let's do it. Here's one I like because it's very, very tangible. Cancer research, and you want to compare tumors that have been imaged around the globe, that requires boatloads of data. That's probably not going to work really well on a low latency, hardware storage appliance. It's going to be better on a scale out file system that's spread across a lot of processors, so you have parallelism. So the thing that we're trying to do is make sure that we've got solutions that fit the problem, because I think most customers will tell you not one solution for storage or for networking fits everything. Now, the problem with that is it introduces complexities to the customer. By the same token, it's also going to introduce efficiency. So you have a bit of a balance, and I think that's a real key issue that we've got to help customers, we've got to help the marketplace with, because you are going to have to make some decisions. Otherwise, you're going to buy one solution that will be sub-optimized for everything. So a lot of points you made I thought were really, really interesting. And we've got to stay focused on allowing scale while, as I said earlier, introducing enterprise class capabilities and management for the infrastructure we bring to the market. So that'd be my thought, Glenn.
Great. Simon Lurie, what's your take on what the vendors are coming through with in terms of new technologies to address problems?
Yeah, look, I guess I'm going to start from a service provider point of view and from a services business, and touch on a couple of points that Jeff and AJ already have. And being part of a team that's working with enterprise customers every day, is that understanding, what the business is trying to achieve is absolutely key to be able to determine, what the right solution is that's going to meet those needs. And Jeff was just talking about it then. You can't just go in, regardless of what your technology patch is, whether you're a network provider, a data center provider, just talking about that component is not enough anymore. Our customers expect, and probably rightly so, that if we're implementing a solution for them into their business, whether it's SD-WAN, whether it's migrating applications to the cloud, that we actually know why they're doing it. We understand whether we're delivering it or not, how that fits into their overall strategy. Because if we don't, we're blind. We're setting ourselves up for failure, and we're also, potentially impacting their business and what they're trying to achieve by not understanding, everything from the compute, the storage, to the network, and the applications that are functioning across all of those. When we're talking about, the next gen workloads such as the AI and the IoT applications, they're requiring real-time processing power. And, from a telco point of view, that means that they're looking for low latency networks and, being able to host the compute resources and data as close to the edge as possible. So really that edge compute and setting up edge data centers or micro data centers and strategies in and around that, and being able to deploy the network capabilities that can optimize the performance of those applications. This is what our customers are expecting from us. And again, consumers, and I'm one of them, just don't tolerate poor performance anymore. If we're doing it now, it's just not good enough. So we need to accept that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we're getting heaps and heaps of questions coming in with lots and lots of votes. So I'm going to change tack in a moment. I'm going to give Simon Lockington a chance to speak, and then we're going to close this question out. And then I'm going to change tack a little bit, and we're going to go through some of these questions, and I'll explain to you the process over in a moment. But Simon Lockington, if you could just give your response to that second question that I posed around what the vendors are doing.
Yeah, so I think the elements about latency and user experience are really important that Simon and Jeff brought up. But I also think security is a big topic these days too. People will tolerate latency as long as their data is secure. But if it's not, then a woeful time is coming to you. And for instance, the DDoS attacks, the size and scale of DDoS attacks in the last year has really grown very heavily, and customers are now running to try and secure their networks for the thousands of IoT devices that they have connecting to their resources, with not a corresponding increase in IT resources to help them do that is a real challenge for them. Likewise, with the impacts of COVID, where you had all your users in sort of controlled physical locations like offices, you could help contain some of the security risks. But now that you have the majority of your users working from remote locations, trying to make sure that your network and your data integrity is not compromised while still offering a level of flexibility to your users so that they can do their job in an effective manner is a massive challenge. And I think going back to some of the latency and user experience issues, moving processing closer to the edge and facilitating private interconnection closer to the edge, so you're not having to shift the data so far from the end user to where the compute resource is, and offering more compute resources closer to the edge to give a more refined user experience is really important. And I think also facilitating experimentation as well. So now that new tool sets, new data sources, new protocols are coming on the market each week, giving customers the ability to try out these new facilities easily by using software-defined interconnects and just easily enabling the consumption of these services and data sources to see if that might give them a competitive or an operational edge is really important.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. All right, we've got lots and lots of questions coming in, actually a flood. So how I'm going to handle it is this. So first of all, I wanted to acknowledge Craig, Subhash, Tim, Parvesh, Hitan, Dennis, for your questions, and they're quite long and quite detailed. How we're going to do it is I'm going to try and get through as many of them as I can. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask the panel for each question, just one panelist. If you feel as though you really, really strongly want to comment on that particular question now, let me know, and I'll let that one panelist respond, unless there's strong demand for more than one. If nobody wants to answer the question now but feels as though they'd like to answer it at a later date offline, maybe through an email or through private discussion later on, signal that now. Or if nobody wants to tackle this question now, we'll kind of work out how we'll address it at a later date. It's quite hard to, with some of these questions, I'm sure are going to be quite detailed. It's hard to kind of answer everything on the spot in a lot of detail. So try and keep your answer to fairly briefly and concise and brief to hit the point of the question. So a lot of these questions have got a lot of votes as well. So I'm going to start with, and the timing's right because we've kind of finished the section really on challenges and on some of the solutions to them. So Craig's question is, how can artificial intelligence and/or automation help in the transformation of the data center and network infrastructure? I'm thinking maybe one of the two Simons would more like to do that, but I don't want to throw you on the spot. What? Anybody?
I can jump in on that one. I mean,
okay.
Infrastructure as a service is obviously a big element, and bare metal as a service is a big part of that too. And being able to turn up and turn down resources using Terraform scripts, for instance, that can be triggered either through manual intervention or as capacity limits hit, I think gives customers more flexibility to address their customer demands without over provisioning with their own hardware, or maybe having some control in keeping the resources in the data center that are controlled by those systems, rather than in maybe a cloud-based environment. And that could be for any particular reason, regulatory, data compliance, for instance, could be a part of that too.
Great, thank you. Anybody else strongly want to respond to that question?
I would just make a comment on the AI front. We talked about the fact that AI is probably going to be faster than human reaction for simple tasks, right? And even for some highly complex tasks that are somewhat repetitive. The point is, I think it's essential that every vendor bring to the marketplace AI capability to manage the product they're selling, right? And I think I see that across wide swaths of both the server as well as the storage community. I can assure you, the part of IBM I work in, which is IBM Storage, everything is now managed by, Watson, that is connected to the product we sold, that's actually monitoring and metering the actual device out on the customer floor or in a co-located cloud provider, and letting that customer know how's the performance, do you have enough capacity, does it look like you lost a drive, you need to replace it. So I think, to Craig's simple question, as data centers become more complex, AI and the automation of managing that infrastructure is essential. It is essential. It might be existential in terms of survival and death of certain organizations if you can't do it. So we're real big believers in it. Obviously we've got a lot of AI products, and as you know, the investment in Watson was significant, but it's yielding real benefits in customer data centers today.
Thank you. Okay, so this tool actually puts in order the questions by number of votes, so the vote order changes. So Subhash, you were first, but you've been outvoted by the audience. So I think Craig's question can probably drop off. That had 12 votes so far. I'm going to go to Tim's question, and then Subhash's. So Tim's question is, clients are expecting 100% uptime these days, as their customers always expect an application or service to be accessible. What can be done to the networks to resolve some of the outages we have seen? Anybody want to take that one, kind of more of a network specific thing?
Hey, look, thanks, Glenn. Look, I'll start off, and anybody can jump in as well. Look, obviously from a network point of view, even as a telecommunications provider, it's fundamentally important that we understand the applications that the businesses are using, how they're using them, where they're using them from, as much as it is important to be able to understand, the networks itself. Networking is what it is. It's bits and bytes traveling across cables, but being able to understand how those applications are using that network, being able to design and build in the resiliency and the redundancy, whether that's route options, as an example, depending on where they're traversing, is really what's fundamental. Because if we don't understand how consumers are using the network, then it really doesn't matter what's in place. Because there's always going to be something that you're unaware of. And one of the key programs that we've got, and something that our service management team is driving really strongly, and happy to follow this up after the session today, is really driving what we're calling zero preventable downtime. And it's something that we're truly passionate about. But again, I think it really comes down to the applications and who's using them and where they're using them, so that we can design the network that's going to facilitate and reduce or eliminate that 100% impact if there is an outage.
Great, thank you.
I think if I could just jump in there for a second, because there's variations in terms of the environments that we're talking about and we're dealing with, right? And Simon's quite right that it is bits and bytes going across a wire, right? And that's sort of generically been a bit problematic. From our standpoint, one of the things that we've decided is we really honestly don't believe that humans can be fast enough. And so we're actually auto-learning the environment. So for the networks that we provide, we're actually learning connection from application to data for initially, 20,000 flows per platform that the human doesn't have to do anything about. The concept behind that is a baseline, because if you don't know the baseline for your network, how do you know when you have a problem, and how do you know what the scale of the problem is and what to do about it? And then the other side of that, and I'm sure both Simon and Simon have similar kinds of softwares in their environments that do the same kind of things, but is to automatically mitigate. Because again, if whenever this issue is coming up, if we can find the bad behaving device, and because we're the network and all the data goes across us, we see it, we can potentially mitigate that platform, throttle that platform, move that platform to a lower priority connection, right? Don't drop it, don't stop it, because it could be mission critical. Could be one of, to Simon Lockington's point, one of those legacy applications that you're not keeping around because it's a favorite pet. You're keeping it around because it's still critical to the business. So it can't be constrained. You have to let it run as best it can, but you need to be able to figure out that balance and handle that in an automated fashion. And so that kind of automated mitigation is something that we're very, very much focused on these days. Notify the human. Let the human review it afterwards, right? Figure out, was that mitigation sufficient? Does there need to be a more permanent mitigation, right? That's the architecture piece that the consultants that Simon Lovey has in his team would look at and go, okay, this is what we want to do about this. But, fix it first as best you can. Let the automation fix it first, and then let the human deal with the triage afterwards.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. Let's do one more quick question and fairly quickly. And this one's from Subhash. So it's quite an interesting one. For the organizations which were heavily relying on on-prem data center business and its IT services to customers, how the digital transformation strategy should help in reusing existing infrastructure, and how to shift to a new revenue model with digital transformation? What should be the new revenue model? Thank you. Wow, that's a good question.
I can take a stab at that, Glenn.
Okay, yep, go for it.
So the on-prem data centers are not dead. Not everything is going to the cloud. What you do need, though, is to make use of an ecosystem, and that's where coming to like an Equinix data center, where you can access that kind of ecosystem with a lot lower latency and a lot less networking cost in terms of performance and financial cost than you could on your own data center attached to your office. There's a key part of that digital transformation. It allows more experimentation with new services. It allows a bit more redundancy that we've been talking about here, and just gives more opportunity to future initiatives that you might try. In terms of the revenue models, I'm not quite sure that I'll touch that one, because I don't know enough about the organization. But certainly, having an on-prem data center is a key part of most companies' architecture, because, like I said, a lot of legacy equipment isn't going away. And in a hybrid multi-cloud model, the hybrid part is an on-prem data center a lot of times, where data is shared. So that would be my response to that question.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody want to have a crack at revenue models? It's a really, really tough question, but also a very, very compelling one.
Well, I was gonna second what Simon said. The revenue model was a little bit beyond my capability.
Yeah,
Subhash, yeah, I think you stumped the panel on that one, to be honest with you. Good
question.
Back to what Simon was saying. The one thing I did want to chime in. Look, no surprise, IBM bought Red Hat, right? Got Linux. That's a good thing. Obviously, that's where containers go. But we've got something called OpenShift, which if you get to that new digital workload, then you don't really care what platform that the application runs on. You can move it to any one you want. my point really in this is not to sell, OpenShift or Red Hat. It's really, if you've done the digitization, right, you then have the ability to choose whether you run it in Simon's on-prem, off-prem data center, and what compute engine you run it on. So if you can get your team to really buckle down and start the refactoring of applications, once you're done, you've got all sorts of agility and flexibility, and you really then can leverage hybrid multi-cloud. I know everybody talks about hybrid multi-cloud, but how many people really are doing an integrated hybrid multi-cloud across a legacy data center and one of the big cloud providers? Pick it, AWS, IBM, Google, whatever, right? I think that's still a bit of a promise. The point is, if you do, the move to a new digital environment, then you have the ability to use that hybrid multi-cloud much more economically. So a little too much philosophy there, but Glenn, I thought it was worth mentioning.
These are nice transitions to the next question that I wanted to raise to the panel in a more sort of structured manner. So I want to talk a little bit about successful business resiliency strategies. So for a hybrid multi-cloud data center environment, what would a successful business resiliency strategy look like? And what expertise and tools do organizations require to build these sorts of strategies? So AJ, I'm going to go back to you for this one.
Yeah, so to start with, I think everybody in IT is very familiar with the concept that Murphy will find you eventually. There's just no instance where that doesn't happen. So one has to plan. A single instance of any application, a single instance of any data set is simply a disaster waiting for something to happen to it, right? So one always has to be working with the service providers and the hosting outfits to get the replication environments in place. Now, not every application in the environment has the same business criticality. So obviously there has to be that sort of tiering concept. Simon Lockington was making the point about the automation pieces. Almost every one of the hosting environments today has an on-prem variant of their automation software as well. And I think at some point when you get to the scenario where the locality of that data set or that application interface is transparent to the consumer, that's actually not a bad thing, right? Because then that can be moved to the best performance scenario, closer to the edge, I think was the point that either Simon was making. But from a standpoint of the resilience of that environment, it's something that we deal with a lot with our financial customers and our healthcare customers, because those data sets are not allowed to go away ever. And the question then becomes, how big of a disaster are you attempting to avoid? Is it within the room? Is it within the building? Is it the campus? Is it a metro area? What's the range of it? For example, this is that we had some years ago a power outage that started in Ohio, traveled its way up through Toronto, came around through Boston, back down the eastern seaboard, took out New York and Philadelphia, and everybody got really excited about the satellite images, which were showing you the complete blackout of the Northeast in the United States. All of the data centers had power generators. All of the data centers were still up and running, integral to themselves for the most part. Nobody planned for all the infrastructure around them to melt down simultaneously. They couldn't talk to anybody. And so at that point, you start looking at replication scenarios that span not just the Hudson River into North Jersey, right? Because our Federal Reserve Bank came back and said, right, lads, no longer, that level of replication no longer sufficient, right? Get on it. And so you see more global scenarios now, right? Where people are moving, cross-continent, this kind of thing. Making sure those data sets are the integrity of those data sets is solid, that the mirrors are correct, right? Banks get very picky about having sets of books that don't match. They would rather a transaction didn't make it to either side if it doesn't make it to both sides simultaneously. That kind of scenario. So there's different impacts, one of my healthcare customers made the point to me that if they lose the system, if they lose the automated system, if they lose the network, nobody remembers how to go back to paper, right? The system of press really hard, you're making 6 copies, and the goldenrod version goes to accounting. Nobody knows how to do that anymore. So this kind of disaster tolerance scenario, it really has to be thought through, and it really has to be rock solid. And that kind of expertise in terms of what you're getting from the service provider, right, down to show me the trenches where the cables are going, so that I know that somebody's not buying from 2 separate companies that are both sourcing the actual optical cable infrastructure from the same provider, and the same backhoe takes out both sides. Thank you. You know, that sort of scenario, you have to ask that second level question every time. And I don't think anybody else in the panel would argue that's not the case.
Mm-hmm. We're starting to get close to time, so I'm going to give the rest of the panel time to close out this question, and then we'll look to close out the session after this. But Jeff, what are your thoughts on this final question around resiliency and multi-cloud? I
am going to merge a couple comments that the Simons made with what AJ just said. Look, you know, for years and years, and I'm very proud of this, right? The big banks around the world run core banking on the mainframe, period. They do. And typically they're using IBM storage because they've developed HADR strategies that address what AJ was just talking about, right? If you lose a piece of hardware, they automatically come up in a second or two in a parallel piece of hardware in the same data center. If you lose a data center, right, they can come up in 25 minutes, 2,000 miles away. So there's one level of HADR, of disaster recovery business continuity, which is high availability and true disaster recovery where your data center is a smoking hole in the ground. The big issue that is really topical today, and every CSO at every customer wants to know about, is what both Simons mentioned, which is the security aspect of your data. If you don't have a consistent copy, you shut down operations. And both guys touched upon it. That is becoming, I think that's a problem that not enough people have really thought through, and there are other ways to solve that. And there are 2 things you've got to factor in. 1, identifying the issue. 2, creating the ability to recover from it in a couple of hours instead of a couple of weeks, right? If you get hit by ransomware, can you be up by the end of the current shift? Or everybody has their favorite example. Are you going to be up at the end of the next month, right? So there's the physical piece. There's the logical piece. You got to do both. It is crucial because, frankly, in the last couple of years, we see probably more cyber events than we do physical events. So kudos to both guys, because I think you both hit the key hot spot. You've got to do both.
Thank you. Simon Lurie?
Yeah, look, I think we're actually all on the same page, you know, in and around this. From, look, my point of view, you know, particularly with COVID, I think it's highlighted again, you know, how important, you know, the resiliency and the business continuity is to the business. I think we all become very complacent from time to time, and it's not until we hit some sort of scenario like what we're in now where, you know, people start to go, oh, you know, we really should dust off that plan that's up on the shelf that we haven't looked at for 4 or 5 years. And, you know, where our users are and where our data is going today is very different to where it was going and traveling, you know, 12 months ago. And for me, the key around a successful strategy and that resilience is having a deep understanding of the environment that you've got, from the physical and the virtual infrastructure, as both Jeff and AJ have spoken about, all the way through to you know, the applications and how they're being accessed and the way the users are accessing them. And it's not the same anymore. You know, and then I think we've all touched on the security aspects. You know, those changes has fundamentally changed the security posture for almost every business on the planet today. And, you know, it looks very different in a remote working environment than it did when the majority of our data was being accessed between a data center and a cloud and our office, and we knew where it was going and we knew what was happening with it. So I think without, some businesses, and there's a few mature ones around, but look, in my time, I haven't seen too many organisations that when you ask them what they've got and where is it and how much of X, Y, and Z that they've got, they actually know that offhand. And I think, really getting back to the bare bones and understanding what's there and how best to design for that resilient future is key to being able to build a proper plan.
And Simon Lockington, I'm just going to pass to you for the last comment before we close.
Yeah. So I'll just build on the other Simon's points. To me, I think it's less about tools and it's more about expertise. And so I think strong partners are vital. The World Economic Forum is projecting like 70% of new value that's going to be generated in the next 10 years will be down to digitally enabled business models. So protecting that value is supremely important. And to help with that, you need partners who have a wide range of expertise. And Simon's Telstra Purple is one of Equinix's bigger partners, and they can help understand your business and all the components of it to help define the right strategy. So you're not over provisioning and overspending, but you have a solution that is operating within the tolerances and the risk profile of the business. And, they can help continue to review and revise that strategy with you as your needs and the market and technology changes. And finally, help navigate the regulatory constraints of your data or your user action or your compute profiles, because they may have more of an influence over your architecture than maybe any technical element that might be part of it. So that's why I think having strong partnerships and not just transactional ones is really key to having a highly resilient business strategy.
That's great. So we've reached time now, so I'll look to close the session. Parvesh, Hitan, Subhash, Zulfahan, Dennis, Ambika, sorry we didn't get to your questions. Probably to answer them all would have been another 30 minutes to 45 minutes, and we just don't have that time. I'll talk to the organisers offline, and we'll try to work out how we can respond to your queries, and I'm sure the organisers will get back to you. I just wanted to thank everybody for joining today's session, and we hope you enjoyed it. I think we certainly all did as panelists and moderator. Thanks to our hosts, IBM and Broadcom. And please let us know how you found the session. I'm just about to put up a quick poll. So before you drop off, please answer this quick poll. Your feedback is important to us. So thank you very much, and goodbye.